Chapter 1. The First Bootful. On your mark, get set, go! 13-year-old Chad Taylor waved his scarf in the air as his younger brother Matt and their friend Dean Muller raced to the edge of the gravel country road. They each grabbed a gray stick off the ground, tossed it into the water that rushed through the pair of aluminum culverts that passed beneath the road, and then dashed back to the other side. "Beat ya!" Matt said, raising his arms in triumph. "Not yet you haven't. Watch!" Dean put his cap on backwards, lay down on a culvert, and peered at the water below. "There it is!" He pointed to his stick as it sailed through ahead of Matt's. "I beat you!" "That's not your stick. Yours was the short one," Matt protested. "Yeah, right. I'm serious." Chad shook his head and smiled at his brother. "Just admit you lost, Matt." "Yeah," Dean added. All right, you got me. Let's do it again," Matt said, already searching the ground for more sticks. Dean checked his watch. "I don't think so. I should be getting home." "Come on, Dean," Matt said. "Your mom won't mind if you're a few minutes late for supper." "That's what you said last time, and I got grounded from TV for a week." "That's because you didn't make it home until after 10 o'clock. "Because you left him stuck up on a roof with no way to get down," Chad reminded him. "In the rain," Dean added.
"How did I know you were waiting for me to help you get down?"
"Because you had the ladder."
Matt smiled sheepishly.
"Oh, yeah. Well, we can't worry about that right now. There's too much to do. The snow is melting like crazy, and we haven't even gotten a bootful yet."
Just then, something in the water caught Chad's eye.
"Hey, look! A whirlpool!"
Matt and Dean ran over to the edge of the road. Sure enough, a small whirlpool had formed between the two culverts. It sucked small sticks, straw, and other debris down into the cold, dark water. Matt grabbed a larger stick off the side of the road and tossed it into the water. It inched toward the whirlpool and then turned on its end before it was sucked down into the blackness. Dean shivered.
"I'd hate to get caught in that."
"Yeah, if you were an ant," Matt replied, punching Dean playfully in the shoulder.
"Or a frog," Chad said, punching Dean from the other side.
"Hey, knock it off!"
Dean swiped at Matt, but he ducked out of the way, laughing. Dean gave Chad a friendly shove instead. Chad regained his footing and then looked out at the ribbon of water that flowed out of the muddy fields. The water sure is high this year. What was normally a dry, grassy ditch had become a full-fledged stream, swollen with the runoff from the winter's unusually high snowfall. The stream glinted and sparkled in the fading sunlight as it flowed through a flooded clump of trees that were just starting to bud. The boys picked up their bikes to head home.
"My dad says it hasn't peaked yet," Dean said. "Lots of snow in the bushes still hasn't melted."
Matt stared at the water, a faraway look in his green eyes. Dean swallowed hard. He had seen that look before, too many times.
"What are you thinking, Matt?"
Matt looked at him and grinned wildly. Chad laughed. "I think you'd better get home for supper, Dean. Well, you still can."
"Okay, see you guys tomorrow."
Dean got on his bike and started pedaling.
"Not so fast, Dean. Just hear me out for a moment," Matt said.
Dean's shoulders sank as he glided to a stop. He knew Matt would not take no for an answer.
"Just make it quick."
"Do you guys remember that TV show about whitewater rafting we watched a few weeks ago?"
"Not me. I was still grounded, remember?" Dean reminded him.
"Yeah, that looked wild," Chad replied. "I'd love to do something like that." Dean shook his head.
"You can count me out. Way too dangerous."
Get off it, Dean," Matt said. "What could go wrong? They were wearing life jackets and helmets, and there's no way a raft like that could ever sink."
"That's what you think," Dean replied. "What if it ran into a tree or a rock? I'm sure people die every year doing that sort of thing."
Matt stared out at the reddish sun, which was just starting to dip toward the horizon.
"Well, I don't think there'll be any danger of that happening on the trip we're going to take."
Dean eyed him suspiciously.
"What do you mean, we? What trip?"
Matt turned to his brother.
"Chad, does Andrew still have that 3-man rubber dinghy we used at the lake last summer?"
Andrew Lowen was a close companion of the boys. He lived on a farm a few miles away from the Taylors, who also lived on a farm about 4 miles outside of town. Chad nodded. "Yeah, his dog bit a hole in it, but I think it could be patched."
"Good. We'll call him when we get home."
Matt got on his bike and started to pedal away. Chad followed. "See you tomorrow, Dean," Chad called back over his shoulder. He and Matt grinned at each other. Dean stood there for a moment, a confused look on his freckled face. Then he looked toward his friends.
"Wait a second. Why do you need a dinghy?"
He turned back to the water and his eyes went wide.
"You're not going to try floating down here, are you? You'd get stuck in the culvert."
"Not here, dummy," Matt said as he circled back to Dean. "On Milligan Creek. I bet the water is roaring through there."
Dean looked up. In the distance, he saw the lights from the grain elevators in the town of Milligan Creek, Saskatchewan, where the boys went to school. Matt and Dean were in grade 6 and Chad was in grade 7. The town took its name from the stream that flowed through it. The creek itself was named after the first family who settled in the area. Throughout most of the year, the creek was small and sluggish, but it was sure to reach record heights with the extra runoff.
"Well, you can count me out. I'm not getting in any flimsy boat and floating down a raging river," Dean said. "You'll probably get hung up on a beaver dam and sink."
"Suit yourself," Matt said, still circling on his bike. "Maybe you can stay on shore and be our safety manager." Dean got on his bike.
"Oh, yeah? We'll see what your parents have to say about the idea."
He started to pedal away, but his front wheel hit a huge rock.
"Hey, wait a second,
Before he could get the words out, he flipped over his handlebars and tumbled down the ditch, right into the flowing water.
"Woohoo! The first bootful!"
Matt cried as he turned back to help his friend.
"First pantful, too,"
Chad added. Chad and Matt ditched their bikes and then climbed down to help Dean out of the stream. Once they dragged him and his bike back up onto the road, Dean sat down and tugged at his rubber boots.
They're stuck."
"Here, let us help."
Matt grabbed Dean's right boot and Chad grabbed the left. Matt looked at Chad.
"Ready?
1, 2, 3, heave!" The boys pulled as hard as they could.
"Hey, careful, you're pinching my toes."
Just then, there was a loud sucking noise and Dean's right boot popped off, sending Matt stumbling backwards down the ditch, straight into the water. Chad nearly fell over with laughter as Matt coughed and spluttered. A horn honked in the distance. They looked up as an old blue pickup truck pulled up. Chad recognized Andrew's tight, curly hair in the passenger window. He was with his dad, Fred. As soon as the truck came to a stop, Andrew jumped out.
"Hey guys, what's going on?"
Chad pointed at the stream where Matt was sloshing around trying to stand up. "It's the second bootful." Matt spluttered and puffed as he finally regained his footing. Dean scanned the water.
"Hey, where's my boot?"
Matt searched the water flowing around his legs.
"I must have dropped it."
"Can't you see it?"
Dean hopped on one foot toward the edge of the road for a better look. Matt looked around again and then shook his head.
"No, current must have carried it off. Sorry, Dean. I'll replace it, but you can have one of mine till you get home, if you like."
He stood on one foot and tried to pull off his other boot. He hopped for a couple of steps before he fell back into the water. Andrew slapped his forehead.
"I can't believe that just happened."
Dean smiled despite himself.
"Hey, quit fooling around. I have to get home. And wait till my mom hears about my boot."
Matt, who was completely drenched, grinned as he climbed back out of the water. He sat down on the grassy bank, pulled off his boot, and then turned it upside down. Water poured out of it. "Here you go." He tossed it to Dean.
Dean grimaced as he held up the sopping wet boot. He winced as he squeezed his foot into it. It's cold. Not nearly as cold as Milligan Creek's going to be when we raft it this weekend, Matt said as he hopped up the bank. Andrew shot him a quizzical look. What are you talking about? Matt put his arm around Andrew's shoulders. If you give us a ride home, I'll tell you all about it. Andrew turned to his dad. Mr. Lowen looked Matt up and down and then jabbed his thumb at the truck box. That's okay with me, but you're riding in the back, Aqua Boy. Matt jammed his sopping wet cap over his thick blonde hair. You ain't seen nothing yet. Dean rolled his eyes. Here he goes. The other boys laughed as they helped Mr. Lowen load their bikes into the back of the truck.